Welcome back to Old Guy REI. Mikey and I are back again with the latest highlights from our latest Zoom call. And we seem to be having several great meetings in a row with a lot of great topics. And it's pretty exciting to see that people are still interested in joining us on Wednesdays, Mikey. I thought I didn't know how long it would last, but we had a couple of new people this week, which was very nice. And some of the topics that we talked about were, um, for example, one of our friends just closed on a duplex and he inherited some tenants. And one of the tenants, he was saying, can only pay by money order because they don't have a bank account. And he was asking for suggestions on some different ways to pay. And through that discussion, some of the people had mentioned that sometimes because these people don't have a checking account, and sometimes it's hard these days to get a checking account depending on your credit score. And I didn't realize that was even a thing. But I think as we've been learning over the last couple months with banks tightening certain aspects of lending, and now more and more of them seem to be checking credit when you open a checking account. Have you ever had that experience?
It was so long ago when I opened my first bank account, but I remember do having to go through some checks on that. The one thing I liked was this investor, he exhausted all options and I learned through his experience because he even talked about checking out Walmart, seeing how if they could do payments that way, but just his level of exhaustion was amazing because people were as a collective group were all offering different opinions and he went through everything because every suggestion that went through is like, yeah, I checked that, I checked that. So it was really good to see.
Yeah, I think he even went to the extreme because somebody had even mentioned opening up a bank account himself so that the tenants could deposit the money into that account at the location where they lived. So, and we've talked before about how, well, like in our experience, we didn't really go too deep into the stabilization or um, that type of thing when we first bought. I didn't go as far as I should have. And this kind of research, with him and how far he went to try to find a solution. And I think he's only been investing for 3 years or so, maybe. So that was great to see, and it helps us all because we'll remember these things, if we ever come across them in our own with our own tenants and portfolios. So that was really good.
Yeah, it just makes me have a note where because he even offered the resource of checking for title deed security and just all of his input in all the meetings has been really great. So, and then even him talking about the postal service as an option, getting certified mail with a tracking number. We're trying to go through a lot of thought process of that and the pros and cons. So yeah, it was a great discussion.
Yeah, I think we might have missed that a little bit on our last highlights where, like you mentioned, he did offer a suggestion where he had contacted his local county to ask about protection against people who are doing fraud with putting a property under their name because that's pretty simple, and then going and getting it notarized and then submitting that to a county so that they could take loans out on the property without the property owner knowing it. And the property owner won't know it until wherever they got a loan from comes after them for the payments. And I think one of the other members had checked that out for his county because he's in Texas, and he said it was a new program that they implemented there. So it's something that we need to check out too for whatever counties that our properties are in to give a little bit of extra protection. I think that's more common these days. That kind of fraud is more common these days than it used to be. So that was a great tip. talking about that, I wouldn't call it due diligence, but diligence in general. One of the other people on our calls weekly had talked about a deal she was looking at, and it was a property being sold by an elderly person with an assumable loan. So it was a good deal, but it was brought to her by a wholesaler. And kind of reflecting back on the type of people that are in our community and their morals, I guess. Uh, it took a little while, but she found out that the deal was brought to her by a wholesaler. She was supposed to pay $100,000 to the seller, but then she found out that the wholesaler was actually making the majority of that money, $60,000 to be specific, and she didn't feel good about it. She kind of felt like the lady was getting taken advantage of, even though the wholesaler told her the seller knew all the conditions and still agreed to it. And so she turned down the deal because of that. And I think it goes to show just the character of everybody in the group, that we don't want to take advantage of anybody if they're down on their luck or anything like that. So that was a really positive note that night. Um, you mentioned some other things that came up in that deal about her research, and we've said before, she goes way out of the way and does all of her due diligence before she looks and makes an offer.
Yeah, when I see her as an investor, as an operator, there's things I can learn because for her to walk the property, she read every single sentence of the HOA statements. She's doing different things, different investing, but it's still in real estate, but she's just expanding her knowledge and then in turn sharing that with us, and then we're growing because of it. It's those type of things that make this meeting so important because, hey, maybe one day we'll come across a wholesale deal and then we can reach out to that investor saying, could you give me a hand? What are things I should look out for? How do you run numbers on a wholesale deal? So that's really incredible.
Yeah, and I think you made me think, if we had a deal brought to us by a wholesaler, I don't know that I would have even thought to. I don't know how she found out how much the wholesaler was making, but in a typical deal, we kind of just hand over the money, and because we're excited to get the deal, right? But I'm glad she found out, and I'm glad she made a decision that was good for her heart. Um, we also talked with uh, someone that just closed on a property, and the property hasn't been rented yet, and he was asking for suggestions on things he might do differently. And I think he ended up maybe realizing that his rents were set a little bit too high, but we've heard of some options, to help you rent your place before lowering the rents. What did you think about that conversation?
That was really good because there was actually another investor who does investing in that same market as well. So I hope they were able to connect afterwards because they said, they were going to do that just to see what numbers they're looking on one end and towards the other. Maybe they can link up, maybe get the right market rents, or maybe get tips and advice on how they could edit the listing to make it more, to get more eyes on it or to make it more alluring for tenants.
Yeah, and that's kind of funny because with the property that he just closed on, he's gone through the lumberjack landlord's course and didn't realize he forgot a few things that the landlord lumberjack suggests, in order to get more eyes on the listing, like you said, ways to list it in general, like the best picture up front, and different aspects about the neighborhood that are positive things that'll that'll draw tenants. And that'll be nice if he can get some of those things and try them before he lowers the rent. So hopefully that works out. And it was nice for them to connect during the meeting, because the second investor doesn't really invest in residential too much anymore. He's leaning more towards commercial. He thinks it's a little bit easier. And he stated that he thinks it's easier in commercial because typically after you rent a place to a tenant, they take care of everything, all the utilities, all the make ready costs for their business and things like that. But I think a lot of us still feel that commercial lending is a little bit risky for us in the beginning with, you know, with the balloon payments and how those loans are structured. So I hope he has good success in commercial.
And on the first property I had, I made those same mistakes where I didn't understand market rents too thoroughly, and also the listing I had was pretty, it was not the best. So I actually reached out to Dion, and Dion had emailed me. He said to rearrange my pictures to maybe make this one part of the house stand out more, move that more towards the front of the listing, different things like that. So that's what I love is you can always edit and change a market listing to get more eyeballs on it.
Yeah, I think those suggestions, like I said, and we'll probably be in the same position. Like, you know, we're trying to fill a few units right now too. They're not ready to list for rent yet, but as soon as they are, we'll keep all of these things in mind. So hopefully they won't be on the market for that long. There was some other questions about switching property management companies. One of our friends up in Washington was telling us how she's had a property with a property management company. I think she said it was for 12 years, and she hadn't had a turnover yet with this PM, and she's going through her first, and the communication was very poor. They seemed to be too busy to get to her place right away, and she was actually thinking of switching right away because of these things she's going through. And I think she said she was about 3 hours away from her property, even though she lives in the same state. And so she was actually going to go there this weekend and see if the property manager finally got to it. It was simple stuff, cleaning, changing the lock sets and things on the doors. That was another thing she brought up, was that she had, I believe she said she had the quick set smart lock or smart key locks, and you can change the key in those without changing the knob. But they took all those out and put cheap lock sets in, and that really made her unhappy. So she was going to go check on that stuff. And with us too, I'm happy with our property management, but it seems like everything you need them to do just takes way, way longer than it should. I've actually been thinking of a way that I could get there and meet with some contractors myself just to get things moving along, because winter is coming. And I think, you know, you're kind of in a similar situation since you're in Pittsburgh, and you were thinking that winter might not be the easiest time to get a tenant.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that. And you know, you made a great point where if you're switching property management, it's good just to be professional, because that's what I did as well. When I switched over, I just said, you know, I'm moving because this is just a kind of better direction for me and how I'm buying properties. Then the former property management, they understood. They said, is there anything else we could have done better? And then I just kind of gave some constructive criticism. And they said, anytime in the future, if you ever wanted to, you know, come back and be with us, we're fine with that. And I said, yeah, thank you for all the time that you spent getting me started. And yeah, I think if you remain professional, you know, I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, I think that gets you a lot further along than, you know, just telling them that they're no good and you're leaving. A lot of times, if you do that, they'll drag their feet, transferring information to the new property manager, and that's not easy for the new property manager either. So I think you're right. One of the other people in the group was from New Jersey, and he asked the group's opinion on a deal he was looking at. And he mentioned that when he ran his numbers, even though he would be house hacking, that he felt it would be a negative cash flowing property. And I think most of us in the group agreed that we wouldn't do a deal like that, especially for our first. What were your thoughts on what he was saying?
I agree as well. You know, there is a thing where you have all the money, you spend all the discipline, saving, getting ready. If anything even comes close, you get so excited because you're in the hunting mode. But and I made this mistake too, where you just go out. It's easy to buy something, but then you end up paying for it over the long run when you see all the kind of mistakes I made. So you're better off just watching the market every day, because the more you see properties every day, the more you see something that will pop off the screen. Then all that time, all that preparation will prepare you, to strike when the time is right.
Yeah, and it made me think too, because when we look at deals, we were always looking for a 10% cash on cash return. And we have found a few, and we wouldn't have bought one that was less than that return on paper. But even at the 10% or 13% that we find, something has always happened in that first year to decrease that return. So, if you're looking at a 10 and you end up with a 7, that's bad enough. But if you're looking at a 2 and you end up negative, that could be even worse. And unless you have a ton of reserves, to get you through that first year, then it could really hurt. So, and then that's just another thought. So maybe you, if you're at a 10 and you end up with a 7 for the first year, that's not too bad. And then once you're able to increase rents or get it better stabilized after the first year, or even 6 or 9 months, you're in a better spot than eating and having to put money into it all the while until you can raise rents. And he mentioned specifically that one of the things that made it a negative cash flowing property was one of the tenants' rent was way below market, and they still had most of the year left on their lease. And then he also talked about some rules that might be coming down next year for his neighborhood that might actually lower rents from this year to next. So he might have been locked in at a lower rent for longer. So we don't like to tell anybody what to do, but I think everybody in the group, had the same opinion that they wouldn't do a deal like that.
And I remember before you had taught me a valuable lesson where you told me I was kind of sweating the numbers, and you see something, it's kind of in your buy box and it's kind of in the cash on cash you're looking for. But then you had told me, hey, you're kind of sweating the numbers. You're tweaking things so it looks good. But when reality, you should stick with the foundation of running your numbers. And that was a good lesson for me.
Yeah, it is kind of hard to listen to people sometimes when you get excited about a deal like that. But then, that leads us to the last topic of evictions, and we talked about evictions at the end of this meeting. What's your experience been with evictions?
It is it is a long haul. And there's the calendar days and there's the court days. And I was kind of telling you, oh, I wish the court days could operate on calendar day time, but it's never that. And it just seems so long. And you got to think about just filing the paperwork. Then you got to wait for the appeal. Then you got to give them a time to leave the property. Then you got to schedule for the constable to come out to change the locks. Then you got to get the quote for the turnover costs. So it is a marathon. And I'm kind of on the tail end of it, but it is something where it's really opened my eyes on how you screen and who's your property manager, what are their criteria. And I don't wish an eviction on anyone because that is rough.
Yeah, it is pretty tough. We're going through a couple of them in the same building. ourselves. And one thing that we've talked about before too was the difference in cost from place to place and from property manager to property manager. Because the first one we had in Milwaukee, they charged, or the fee for an eviction was $1,500. And there were other reasons that we switched PMs from them to the new people, but the new people, it was only $480. And that's even if the tenant asked for a hearing. So that was a huge difference. And then, we just talked too about, once you get through the eviction, once you get through the make ready, then your property manager is going to take half or a full month of that first month's rent. So you're not going to see a full month of rent for a while. And after you've gone through all the time it took to get them out, and the cost adds up. That was another thing that came up with the eviction topic was, is it worthwhile chasing the tenant to recoup the back rents and things like that? And I think in your case, you figured that it wasn't worthwhile because it would cost almost as much. The process would cost almost as much as you were owed. Is that right?
Yeah, not legal advice, but what I was told was it's about 3 to 5 thousand to send to collections, and the net judgment was around 4,000. So I was told it wasn't worth it at that time, and that what I could do is file a court of common pleas, and I think that was $600 to file. So I guess if the tenant were to make any large purchases in the future, she would have to pay the net judgment first to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that's my understanding. But others have mentioned there's different ways you can go about it. Maybe I have it differently, but that's the kind of route I went. That's my first one.
Yeah. I think one of the other points of view that night was that, if you're owed 4,000 in rents and the attorney's fees or whatever the cost of the eviction. So if you're 5 or 6,000 down, that would count as a loss on your taxes.
Mm.
So when you file your taxes, it might help a little bit in that way too. So I think it's good the way you did it. If that way, like you said, if they ever go to purchase something large and need credit or need to do payments, they won't be able to because that judgment is on the record. So I like that.
Yeah, and in my mind, it was funny because Dion, he had that talk where is that EPI, assume positive impact. And I tried to keep that mindset where, hey, at least I met a good lawyer and I have that connection now. So ever in the future, I can have someone to lean on in any legal aspect.
Yeah, and I think really, even though the the process for picking a good tenant, we could put all these things in place to hopefully give us the best result, but you never know. And I think a lot of people out there just, I don't know, sometimes they'll criticize us like, where are you finding your tenants or whatever, because they've never had an eviction or a turnover. Or I don't know where they're investing at, but I think if you're in it long enough, you're going to run into this kind of a situation. And I think, like you just mentioned, learning what you can to help protect yourself in the future is the best thing you can do to move forward. So I'm glad things are working out, and hopefully we'll both get our units filled right away before winter sets in, and next year should be better.
Yeah, please, I don't need any Christmas presents, just please. But and another thing is, what I appreciate is you can look on each state, you can look at the court records, and before, like for a potential tenant, you could just look at their name, see if they have any case history before you move forward. So that was the tip I learned.
Yeah, perfect. So we're looking forward to our next highlight video. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we stop for this week?
Yeah, another investor had asked about what type of hotel rates we're seeing and where we're looking at staying. for the ORAD Vegas event in February of next year. So I was just checking maybe this was for a 6 night stay, and a lot of the downtown hotels, so there's the strip of Vegas and there's a downtown of Vegas. We're kind of looking more in the downtown hotels of Vegas, which would be an 8 minute drive from the Blind Center. And I checked yesterday, some of the prices I'm seeing for a 6 night stay would be downtown Grand was $819. Golden Nugget was $1319. The D was 870, and Main Street was 784. So that's kind of a rough kind of guide. Golden Nugget is your upper echelon hotel, and I would say maybe Main Street is more on the lower end. Downtown Grand and the D, I think, are a little bit in the middle. So maybe a range of 800 to 1300.
Yeah, I don't think that's too crazy. We are staying at the Golden Nugget. Cynthia and I and a couple of our other friends are staying there too. And we are going in early on Wednesday to make a little bit nicer of a trip, but also because Valentine's Day is on Friday and President's Day is on Monday. So we're coming in on Wednesday and leaving on Tuesday to avoid the busy time. But also, you had a suggestion last year. I think you did some research and purchases for your trip on Black Friday.
Yeah, Black Friday, I was able to get a hotel, and then that was probably one of the better prices I've seen, and I hope it'll continue. So that's what I'm looking forward to. But I actually purchased my Southwest tickets with points last month, and that was I had saved it was 40,000 points for this time I bought it. But last year when I waited all the way up until November, it was 60,000 points. So quite a jump.
Yeah, that's quite a few dollars difference. Yeah, well, thank you for that research. I'm sure that's going to help somebody because somebody did ask about where everybody was staying. Some of the people are getting Airbnbs, and last year a few different people joined in on the same Airbnb, and I think they got their rates down under $100 a night. So that was pretty crazy. So hopefully that helps. And again, we're looking forward to seeing everybody again this February, and hopefully all the tickets will sell out. He's got 400 and some available. I think right now he's at about 100 sold, and hopefully that'll pick up. Last year he sold out, and that was 325 or something like that, 350 tickets. So we're hoping for
And no better way to represent the tribe than picking up a shirt too, so that you can roll into next year with a
yeah.
memorial type of shirt.
Yeah, that's right. We still have a few of those to sell. We'll put a link in the description in case anybody would like to pick one up. I know we sold a couple more last week, so we're getting those mailed out this week. And I'm not sure how much longer we have to be able to order from the printer. So if anybody hasn't gotten one yet and wants to get one, please do so soon.
Yes.
Thanks for that reminder. All right. So we'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.